Okay, well, I'm joined today by Tom Norman and Tony Vanelli of the now famous, or perhaps infamous, depending where you stand, FarmKind. And we're going to be speaking about your latest campaign, which has rubbed some people the wrong way in vegan communities. I want to get into the campaign and talk about it, but just first of all, it must have been a crazy few weeks for you guys. How are you both doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. It was hectic. It was busy. Obviously, it was a bit stressful. But I've been an activist for a very long time, so I'm kind of used to handling things this stressful and hectic all the time.
Yeah, I think we always knew that this campaign was going to cause some controversy. I think we have been taken by surprise by the sort of intensity of the reaction. We didn't necessarily even know if anyone would even notice when the first article kind of came out, because you do a lot of stuff in an organization like this that doesn't get a lot of attention. You're just throwing things out constantly. But yeah, I guess ultimately, like we expected there to be some level of controversy, so we were psychologically prepared for that. And I think some of the conversation has been like really interesting. You've had a couple of conversations on the channel about this. We've had a lot of conversations both publicly and privately with people with a whole range of different views about this campaign. And it has been really interesting to have conversations around, as a movement, around some of the strategic questions I think this campaign has highlighted as well.
Yeah, for sure. I found a lot of the discourse on this very fascinating, as you know. I'm sure most people watching are going to know about the campaign, but just for anyone who's been living underneath a rock, do you want to tell us broadly about the Forget Veganuary campaign and also FarmKind's broader theory of change here?
Sure. Tony, do you want to do that, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the campaign itself was really aimed to capitalize on the time of year when veganism or diet change is already, a key focus in the media. So obviously it's New Year's resolutions, but then on top of that, Veganuary has become such an institution, particularly in the UK. Every year, the media talk about it. So we knew that the conversation would be happening. So it presented a good opportunity for us to try and shift the narrative a bit. So instead of having it completely focused on the pros and cons of diet change, which, personally, having been at Veganuary now, I had been at Veganuary for 6 years, in the media, the discourse was shifting much more towards the negative, the cons of diet change, rather than the positives, unfortunately. And our goal really was to capitalize on this moment in time, but try and shift the narrative to be like, it's not just diet change. That's not the only option out there for people who want to help animals, because we know most people do. Most people don't like factory farming, but we really wanted to try and move the needle so that the conversation was not just stuck in this one place. And then maybe, Tom, you can speak to the wider theory of change of FarmKind.
Yeah, so FarmKind really, we exist to solve one of the biggest bottlenecks, or help to solve one of the biggest bottlenecks in the animal movement, which is funding. So we have an estimated 300 million, maybe a little bit less, going into farm animal advocacy of all kinds across the world. This has got a split between 80 billion land animals, 440 billion shrimp, many billions of fish. And so there just simply isn't enough money for all the great campaigns that exist, and for trying new ideas that currently are sitting in the minds of animal advocates that could be, the next thing that that really makes a difference for animals. And so what we try and do is we try and help with that by our kind of core, if you like, business is working with experts to identify charities that have either a particularly strong theory of change, or a particularly good sort of history of demonstrating that they are able to help animals really cost effectively, do a lot with your money, with your donations, make that 300 million go as far as possible. And then we recommend them to the general public to say, look, if you care about this issue, if you want to do something to help, one of the options for how you can help is simply to donate. And then we have this offset idea, which is kind of like where this campaign comes from, which is really specifically targeting that group of people out there who do say that they hate factory farming in surveys and are not doing anything sort of with their diet or with their personal choices about it. And so saying, okay, can we get those people can we make them think differently about this? Can we make them think about it as like, oh, like a bit like offsetting your carbon or something, and get them to be donating in this kind of other way? And this is kind of one of the experiments we've been running since we started, and trying to explore like how is this appealing? Like how many people like this? Like can you scale this concept up? And obviously this campaign, the Veganuary campaign, was kind of like intimately linked with that part of what we offer.
Okay, nice. Well, yeah, thank you for that background on the campaign and the organisation more broadly. That's really helpful. And we'll talk more about the Forget Veganuary campaign specifically. But on the theory of change, donating to animal charities is good and can help a lot of animals. But presumably, for that to work, presumably somebody has to be eating less meat. Is that entailed, do you think? And does that mean that this theory kind of runs out of, there's a time when it becomes kind of self-defeating?
Yeah, so I think two things. I think this actually like is part of the discourse around kind of offsetting, like broader than this campaign. I think this really gets to why, in my opinion, some of the kind of critique of it as a practical sort of theory of change is kind of misconceived. We're not proposing that like this is the solution to factory farming, and if everyone just offset, like, there'll be no factory farming. Or like clearly that's not the case. We're saying that like where we are now, like living in the world that we currently do, with the numbers of vegans that we have, with the amount of money that as a movement we have, a thing that we could advocate for people to do now, a sort of first step that people could be taking to help grow the movement, to help increase the number of people who are doing something to help animals, and also practically to help animals in factory farms right now, and advance our more strategic long-term goals like cultivated meat, like institutional diet change campaigns, which some of the money that we raise also goes to fund. We're saying that we think this offset the concept, or donating as an alternative ask, is a really exciting and interesting step, like theory of change that we should be seeing if that's more compelling. So, research does suggest that people do generally see this as an easier thing to do than changing their diet. It can be at least as effective in terms of the amount of animal suffering prevented, if not more so, quite easily. Obviously, depends how much you give into where. And so we think for that reason, right now in 2026, this is a really interesting thing to be trying to like advocate for more people to do. That doesn't mean if you wind the clock forward like 20, 30 years, that will still be the case. Maybe hopefully things will have massively moved on, and we'll be, talking about trying to get people to adopt eating cultivated meat or whatever it might be, right? But like we're living in the 2026 world and thinking about what could be effective right now to help animals. Just as, once we've banned cages in the UK, which we will have done soon, hopefully, there'll be no point in giving money to a cage-free campaign in the UK.
I think another point as well, and for me this is equally important, is that it's getting rid of that artificial divide between the vegans and the non-vegans, like finding the common ground that unites most people in the world, which is they don't like to see animals being harmed unnecessarily. And the vegan belief is, well, to eat them is unnecessary, and that's a valid point of view. But for many people, that to them is just unachievable. They may have tried to give up animal products in the past and not been able to, or it's just not something that appeals to them for whatever reason. They're just unable to do it. So rather than being, us good, them bad, this campaign is a way to say, no, we all share this common ground. There are other things that you can do as an individual to help, make an impact on this issue that you also care about. And as we grow that movement of people who are trying to do something good for farmed animals, we will make more progress in all the other areas that we want to see. So, we will make more progress towards cultivated meat and institutional change and individual diet change, because it will become easier for people who care about animals to make those individual changes. So it's really increasing our movement's potential by bringing in people who broadly agree with us, but are just, unable to do the one thing that most people think they have to do to be on our side.
Yeah, there's useful clarifications, and I am pretty sympathetic to the theory of change overall, and it's useful to hear the clarification that it's kind of contingent on where we are now and what is most easily achievable and most easily impactful. I think, yeah, in my view, it kind of comes down to an empirical question of which approach is more tractable to help more animals, basically. And
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear so. So there's, I think I've seen some evidence and discussed some evidence in favor of your approach, and that funding is more important at this stage than diet change, frankly, and a more tractable, achievable ask. Do you think there's enough evidence to support that this theory is helping more animals in the long term? Obviously, the concern is, on the one side, you're kind of doing some moral licensing, and perhaps people are going to be less likely to go vegan if they think that they can offset instead, versus the kind of pragmatic case. Well, what can we actually do with the donations, though? Can we help more animals that way? What's your thoughts on if there's enough evidence to kind of support this route?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, we don't have enough evidence to be confident in any direction on this question, and I would encourage research people out there to look at this question more, because if we look at the evidence base on, for example, vegan pledges and kind of vegan asks in general, there isn't very, very strong evidence in particular either direction. My personal view that if you look at long-term trends of veganism overall, they are relatively stagnant in the US for a very long time, in the UK for at least the last 6 years. There's a depressing Our World in Data article where it has a time series for the UK for eaters, vegans, vegetarians, and flexitarians, I think. And you can just scroll along and see how it changes since 2019. And essentially, it bobbles up, vegans bobble up and down a little bit, by 1 or 2 points, but they stay around 2 to 3 points the entire way through, right? So I think that I would say that the evidence suggests that veganism as a kind of ask has a lot of problems. It has historically not performed particularly well, despite people trying a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that there isn't some way we haven't discovered yet that would be much more effective. Of course, that might be true, but where we are currently, I think the evidence is strong that it is an especially promising place to put our efforts, and given all the things we can do to help animals right now. Whether we can use whether you can get people to donate instead. Lots of people already donate. This is a very common action. Far more people donate to some charity. Far more people donate to animal charities, in fact, than are vegans. In the US, I think it's about 14% of people give to animal charities. It's just that the vast majority of those are giving to dogs and cats charities right now. About 95% of those. And that doesn't include wildlife charities as well. So that would be even more people if you add that stuff in. And so I think that there's a prima facie case that offsetting or donating instead of diet change or as an alternative ask is very promising for people. It also has the kind of some just intuitive advantages of you do it once and then you don't have to remember to do it every single day, whereas you have to make a choice every time you eat to eat this or not that. And some of the problems that we know that veganism has for people, like people reporting feeling socially isolated and things like this, are just not true of diet change. Are not true of donating in the same way. So I think I don't know is the short answer. We're trying to find out, but I think there are good reasons to think that it might be a more effective ask.
Yeah, there's okay, fair enough, interesting. And I've heard you saying, well, we'll get into it. I've heard you saying as well that it may not necessarily be the case that there's a massive reduction in veganism as a result of somebody saying this. I think you've gone on to this discussion in David Ram's. It's kind of assumed, I have a kind of model where there's a number of animals that you can help by more donations, but then there's a number of animals harmed by fewer vegans. There's kind of an assumption that there are, in fact, going to be fewer vegans as a result of a campaign like this, but you've expressed some uncertainty as to whether that's the case.
Yeah, I don't. Tony, do you want to speak to this question? I've talked about.
Yeah, this is based entirely on my personal experience, but that is 35 years as an animal rights activist, increasingly spending less and less time in the vegan bubble, spending a lot more time with people who have never thought about these issues, have never been inside a factory farm, never watched a video. And I've spent a lot of time sitting in saunas at gyms with weightlifting men. And there are very few of them who have ever contemplated the idea of going vegan, full stop. But I had great conversations with these guys about the way animals are treated, because they would talk a lot about the meat they were eating and their protein, etc. And when you raise the issue of factory farming and talk about how chickens are treated, they're just as appalled as any of us. But the chances of them stop eating that chicken, is very, very slim. So, just from that experience alone, I would say the kind of people who this campaign and FarmKind is aimed at are very unlikely to stop eating meat anytime in the near future, until it becomes much more accessible for them, more affordable for them to choose the alternatives. It's just, that is a fantasy land, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would add is when we set up the campaign, we thought about, I think one of the, Tony's mentioned this already, is a lot of the media of veganuary is already negative. And so we've been talking about it is like, we're essentially sort of trying to judo flip the pre-existing negative coverage into something that is, instead of talking about like, should you change that or not, is, yes, we all agree that factory farming is bad. Now, what do we do about it? Like that was sort of the aim of this campaign. And so I think that the campaign would be would cause less vegans, you'd have to believe that we caused new negative articles to happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened, just with some other theme, that people who otherwise were thinking of doing veganuary are reading the Telegraph, the Mail, GB News, etc., and were sort of on the edge, but then they read this article and it pushed over the edge. And I think that, I mean, we literally don't know, right? But like, I think that seems like quite, I think our baseline should be that's quite unlikely to be the case.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I certainly see the thinking and, like I say, the theory of change here. It's a very bold choice to, for the campaign, partner with competitive eaters and having them do the day of meat eating challenges. It's a very bold choice. I can see the thinking there. You're kind of betting that you're in a trolley problem like situation where essentially you can help many times more animals by sacrificing a few, by saying there's going to be a lot of resources behind this one goat, for example, that we can use to help animals if we sacrifice the one goat. Is that a fair characterization of the thinking there?
I think a critical part of this is like, how do you get people to listen to you? And part of our experience with this organization is we did, for example, social media videos that have say literally nothing about your diet at all. That's like, I don't know, chicken smarter than you think, or something like this, or like, oh, look at this charity that's like helping pigs to not be kept in farrowing crates. And the comments underneath are all, but I'm not going to go vegan though, but like I love my bacon, etc., etc. There is just like an assumption that you're talking about diet change when you start talking about factory farmed animals. And one of the things we're trying to do is get past that, get people to actually listen to the thing we're actually saying, which is the ways that these animals are being kept is not a way that you would find acceptable, that you do care about this and want to do something, and actually there is something you could do about this, that you'd be prepared to do. And there is some research from an organization called Pax Fauna that says that people are more likely to, one of their findings was that more people are likely to listen to people who they know eat on these issues than they were prepared to listen to vegans or people who say, oh, I used to eat meat, but I'm vegan, or anything like this. And so there was a kind of, there's an element of like, this feels like something the media could be interested in, but there was a real kind of thought behind why we chose to do the campaign this way, based on based on some evidence and our experience of trying to communicate with people about these issues.
Yeah, I think people have to believe you. They have to feel that you're genuine when you say you don't have to change your diet. They have to genuinely believe that you're not trying to get them to go vegan by the back door, or they will switch off almost as quickly as if your message was simply go vegan. So by partnering with people who were actually eating meat, and, to be fair, like, these guys are doing these challenges regularly. So it's something they would have been doing, like animals they would have been consuming either on behalf of FarmKind or as part of FarmKind's campaign, or for a restaurant who was, they were promoting, etc. Like, this is what they do every day. So by showing, like, no, we mean it. When we say you don't have to change your diet to help animals, there are other ways you can have a big impact. We really mean that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, again, I totally appreciate, in theory, that, I mean, the theory that you can, even if there is counterfactually some animals harmed, let's say, I can appreciate the theory that this is going to enable you to help much more animals in the long term. And I think I'm very sympathetic to that kind of utilitarian approach and way of thinking about it. It's, some people would say that the animals that we're proposing to help in this situation are much more out of sight, out of mind. They probably don't even exist yet. Whereas that was a real goat that guy ate. So what was it like to actually do the pulling the lever in the trolley problem? What was that like for you guys subjectively?
Tony, do you want to speak to this, or do you want me to?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've been in so many farms. I mean, I've lost track of how many factory farms and slaughterhouses I've been into, and how many, literally weeks of my life I've spent watching back footage of animals in such abject suffering, half their skulls missing while their flock mates are pecking the last shreds of life out of their body, and no one's coming to save them. When you have seen that much suffering, it's not that you become desensitized, but you do feel like, the greater good sometimes really is the ultimate objective. And if we can help spare, 100,000 birds from enduring that with this campaign, then, obviously I'm not the goat, but for me, I think that is a trade-off worth taking.
Yeah. I just want to really echo that. I think often sort of the utilitarian kind of way of thinking can be characterized as very kind of cold and calculated, and like that's partly on us because we like to like talk in spreadsheets and do that sort of stuff, right? I think that stuff is important, but like I think for a lot of us, certainly for me, and I think Tony as well, like underneath that sits a real like emotional drive to say, like, I can, although the animal I can see is in suffering, I know and feel that there are many more animals that in that same situation, and will be next year and the year after as well, unless we do something about it. And as much as we might love and care about that one animal, I don't see a reason not to love and care about those animals I can't see any less than that. And I'm not always perfect at that. Like I care about my own cats more than I care about other people's animals, right? But I do try and live up to that value, and I do also feel that value. And I think that fundamentally that's what motivates a lot of the work. That's certainly what motivates why I got into doing this in the first place, right? Is feeling that as much as I care about one animal, like I care about them all and want them all to have better lives. And so it really does, like it really is real animals that we're trying to help, and helping more really is a big difference for each of those individuals that you could theoretically go and meet and would feel that way about each of them individually.
And I think there's another point here, which is, this criticism is a bit unfairly pointed at us exclusively, when actually this is something that many groups do in different ways. So, when I was at Veganuary, one of the problems we recognized was that, people seem to be increasingly giving up eating beef, red meat because they care about the environment. But that is leading to an increase in their consumption of chicken and fish, who we know suffer more because the conditions are much more intensive. There's greater numbers of them involved. So we had a big focus, like twice a year, we ran campaigns specifically focused on trying to convince people to stop eating chickens, and then another campaign specifically on fish. And you could argue that when we're doing that, we could be ignoring an easy, the low-hanging fruit, where if we just said, cows are great, pigs are adorable, please don't eat them, we could save a couple more cows and pigs and let them keep eating the chicken and fish, because that's a big, harder ask to make. But we felt that's not a justifiable trade-off. More animals will die if we ignore the fact that by focusing on the cute, species, they're just going to eat more of the other ones. So all groups sort of make these trade-offs regularly.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. There's a lot more trade-offs than perhaps people tend to think about or even notice in their own work as well. And yeah, I agree with what you've both said about the scale thing. I mean, for me, I always think about that neglect of scale study with the birds in oil, and how many birds would you save from the oil, right? Where people give the same amount to save 200 birds as they would to save 20,000 birds. And the point of that study is meant to be that's like a bug, not a feature of our psychology, right? We actually should be 100 times more concerned about 20,000 birds than we would be about 200 birds. But we sort of fail to do so just because, our emotional response doesn't scale in that way. But that's not meant to be. It's a bug, not a feature, right? And so for things like the single identifiable victim effect, right, where people become less likely to give to a group of children as opposed to one child and stuff like this. I'm definitely in line with the utilitarian thinking on these kind of trade-offs, and I think in most cases where people's inclination is to disagree with that, my thought is, well, you're just not like appropriately scaling for the number on the other side, right? But there you go. I guess people have different intuitions on that, so I'm sure people can duke that out in the comments. So one thing I've become sensitive to is the impact of the campaign on the Veganuary organisation. And I think that you guys had probably hoped that they would take it as an opportunity, but in fact they were more upset than perhaps you anticipated. What's your message to the team at Veganuary and to the movement more broadly?
Yeah, so I think there are two kind of parts to this that I want to speak directly to, kind of message for the people at Veganuary, but also I think sort of sitting behind this is a question about communication between us and Veganuary. So I'll kind of, if you like, I'll address both of those. I think the first thing is to say that, like, we understand that many of the staff and people at Veganuary, supporters of Veganuary, people associated with Veganuary, felt caught off guard by what appeared to them to be an attack on their work, and that many people felt this was deeply demotivating, and there's almost a sense of kind of betrayal from this coming from another animal organization. And we are really sorry for those people that that was an effect of our campaign. It certainly wasn't our intent, but nonetheless, we live in a world of consequences, and that was a consequence. And so we're sorry that we caused people to feel that way. We want to acknowledge that many people have been, as Tony has been in this movement for 30 years, some people for longer, working every day, some burning themselves out to try to forward the cause of animals, whether that's through vegan activism, whether that's through whatever, working on a sanctuary, whatever particular part of our movement which is very diverse and wide, that they've been doing. And that many of those people would have felt that they've been dealing with pushback and ridicule from sort of the general public for a really long time. And many people will have seen what our campaign and felt that this was like, now they're even getting it in the neck from other people in the movement. And that can really feel like a gut punch. And so again, we acknowledge that, again, that wasn't our intent, but we are sorry that it came across that way to people. I guess one of the things we want to say is, like, we appreciate that, while we have different disagreements about what the most effective ways to help animals are, where we should be putting our time, money, resources, etc. We very much acknowledge that everyone is pushing for the same goal, which is to help animals and be free of suffering and to end the abuse and suffering of animals in factory farms and indeed our wider society. So we just wanted to really underline that we are sorry for the hurt that we've caused, and that we also did not intend to disparage people, to make them feel disheartened. Specifically on the communication point, so Veganuary and we have both put out statements. We don't consider those statements to contradict each other. I know that Veganuary have told us that they also don't consider those statements to be contradictory of each other. I won't probably go through kind of the blow by blow unless you want me to, but nonetheless, to say we loped their CEO, Wendy Matthews, in from an early stage in the campaign, and we've kept them up to date. We made some mistakes in terms of under communicating on some specific things, but and we have a EA forum post which goes through this in kind of a lot of detail that people can read, where we point out specifically where we think we went wrong and what we've done as an organization to try to fix that for the future. But we tried to imperfectly do our best to keep them up to date and be as communicative as we could on the campaign as we went through. And I think we've improved that even as the campaign's gone on. We've got better at that. We've responded to criticisms from the wider movement, and also points from Veganuary to change certain things about the campaign as we've moved forward, to try and kind of shear off some of maybe the rougher edges of it as well. I don't know if Tony, you wanted to add anything in, because obviously you have a pre-existing relationship with the Veganuary folk as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love Veganuary as an organization, and I'm super proud of the time that I was there. And I think that they do important work raising awareness of factory farming and alternative proteins, and they have changed the conversation about veganism in the UK by making it okay just to try it. It doesn't have to become your identity, and I know that everyone who works there genuinely believes any change people make for animals is a positive thing. No one there thinks you have to go vegan or you're doing nothing to help animals. Everyone there believes that welfare improvements are an advancement. People just reducing their meat consumption is an advancement. And they're all incredibly wonderful, compassionate people. And so certainly our intention was never to bring any sort of stress into their lives unnecessarily. And also from my time at Veganuary, I know that the media was increasingly less interested in our side of advocacy, and it was getting more and more difficult to get Veganuary into big news pieces in the UK, and they were putting a lot more anti-vegan messaging out during that crucial time of year. So I genuinely believe that this would be an opportunity for Veganuary to put forward a pro argument. Like, this group, someone who actually used to work for you, is saying this might not be the best way to help animals, or this isn't necessarily the only way to help animals. That's a great opportunity to then say, no, this is why it's a great opportunity to help animals and your health and the planet. There's such a broad argument that could be put forward on their side in response to it. Now, of course, the media doesn't always work like that. It doesn't always give people, fair time to respond and put together a statement. But certainly, it presents an opportunity, a potential opportunity for that was becoming increasingly less available to Veganuary because the media was just less interested in talking about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'm sure that, the team at Veganuary are really going to appreciate all of the kind things that you've both said about them. And I'm very pleased to have heard leaders on both sides of this apparent divide saying, no beef intended, so to speak. I'm sure that they're really going to appreciate that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I hear what you're saying as well about creating an opportunity to make the case. And I think, yes, it's certainly in vegan circles there has been a lot of people wanting to vociferously make that case, and there has been genuinely, as you said, a lot of good discourse and new kind of scrutiny brought to this question and points made on one side and the other. And I hope that the net effect is going to be a good one. Obviously, you mentioned the media coverage, and obviously the press coverage really focused on the meat eating part of the campaign and not really on the donations so much. What did you guys think of the press cover, or what have you thought of the press coverage that's been around so far?
I mean, I guess certainly from the Telegraph, it is what I expected. They have had a very overt anti-vegan stance. Their editorial policy has been, openly anti-vegan for a few years now. So I knew that, that it's a story that would interest them. It would be an audience who, again, were probably unlikely to be taking part in Veganuary if they're avid readers of the Telegraph. So, it wouldn't necessarily be pulling people away from that campaign. And it would talk about, an action people could consider taking that would help animals without necessarily changing their diet. And, I believe the donating aspect was in there, so that it wasn't completely overlooked. But it also just made people think, and that's kind of the starting point, like, oh, okay, I do care about factory farming, like almost giving them permission to admit that they care about factory farming. Here's someone who has spent 30 years of her life telling people to go vegan, who's saying, actually, you don't have to go vegan to care about animals and to do something to help them. So even if it's just flipping that switch in their brain and they start seeing other opportunities for where they can make a difference for factory farmed animals, that's great. The GB News interview, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's precisely the media coverage we were hoping to get from this campaign. Like, also a very overt anti-vegan stance, their editorial stance, very anti-vegan. But basically, by the end of the interview, he was promoting donating to offset meat consumption, because he is precisely the audience we're trying to reach. Like, as he said, I'm never going to stop eating meat, but I don't want those animals to be treated badly. And I'm willing to donate to, help change the way these animals are treated. That's exactly the message that we were trying to get out there. So, yeah, I think that proves that there's an audience receptive to this message.
Yeah, I second everything that Tony. Just wanted to add a little bit of additional context on our strategy. So, because I think this is something we were to communicate at the time, but it's important to understand what we were doing and what the things we were doing. So, we were never particularly individual pieces of kind of print media, so like articles online, to drive significant numbers of donations. In the past, this has never been a big donation driver for us. There are lots of reasons to expect that like articles wouldn't be great at that. What we really wanted to do was part of the campaign was to see if we could get the idea of offsetting on to TV, if we could get people to do that. And what we were envisaging is, as Tony says, like a TV spot that's much more balanced, much more kind of our ideal TV piece would have had somebody from Veganuary and somebody from us, and we'd be kind of like putting both sides of the story. And so as an audience member, you'd get really both sides. The purpose of the piece was really to try to give us a jumping point into that. And so that piece had to be a bit spicy, because otherwise it wouldn't be interesting to a producer. They wouldn't pick it up if they didn't feel that there was like, they could get an interesting debate out of it. And then we would be able to like sort of, go on. The idea was we would try and then go on and everyone would be agreeing that factory farming was a bad thing and just talking about different ways to deal with that. So that was what we were trying to make happen. And we were going to try to see if we could get that to happen. So I think that's important context when people are looking at that Telegraph piece and going, oh, like, that's never going to raise donations. Like, we didn't particularly expect it to. It was part of a broader strategy that we were able to secure the GB News piece. There are we toned down our campaign over time, and so like maybe we didn't get as far with it as we'd like. But like that was kind of where we did that. But also, we were surprised, frankly, given the results that the campaign achieved in terms of media, we didn't hit like our aim goal of that kind of debate on a really big channel. We were quite surprised about how much the campaign did generate in donations, which I think suggests that like, and I would count myself in this group, like we shouldn't necessarily just assume that we can look at a piece of media and be like, I know how many donations that will get. So our campaign, I'll give you exclusive, Chris, on the. So currently we think that our estimate. So it's a little bit hard to attribute donations through our platform because lots of things come in and we're trying to work out exactly where they came from. So our estimate on the most conservative end we estimate the campaign raised $16,700, and on the more relaxed kind of attribution of where donations came from, $59,300. So like that, we don't think that that's like overall a really positive result, in the sense of we try and raise more money than that. You know, we our December campaigns from, for example, our YouTube ads and things like this raised a lot more money than this. But for those pieces of coverage to generate that, I think that's actually a surprisingly good result. It's better than I would have thought that would have been. And I think that that's an important piece of kind of context when anyone is looking at these and thinking about like how well was this campaign executed, and like whether it was a good idea or not, and so forth. And like there are other reasons to still think it's a bad idea or badly executed, right? I'm not saying everyone has to agree with us, but like I think this is an important piece of context.
And I think it's important to put it in context of like what a movement does and what every organization in a movement does. Like Veganuary didn't try and get national press coverage to directly lead to people signing up to do Veganuary. There's no way of really measuring that, because few papers are going to publish a link and they're not going to publish a bespoke link. But it's just awareness raising of the issues and get people thinking and starting, you know, the change, the paradigm shift in people's minds and across society. And as a movement, the more we do that, then it increases the chances that the next time they come across something asking them to sign up for Veganuary, they might do that. Or they get a donation ask, you know, for FarmKind, they might do that. But you have to plant the seed.
Yeah, interesting. There's definitely been the seed firmly planted in the movement. And I think that if vegans look at this and say, well, I don't agree with this campaign, but I've been made aware of donating as a very, you know, prominent path for making change, I think that's a good thing. So, I mean, are those numbers for, is that like a one-off raising, or is that per year or per month or something else?
Yeah, so that's the total, and people haven't in the end given sort of with the, they haven't in all given with that suggested amount. So a lot of people have like calculated maybe like a period of time and then donated it as a one-off or something like this. We found people using our calculator to do things like try and work out how much they'll eat for the rest of their lives and just give it all in one go and things like this. So that doesn't represent, you couldn't divide that number by 15 and come to the total number of donors. There's far fewer donors than that would be from this campaign.
Okay, fair enough. And did you have so yeah, I mean, I've described this as a bit of moral entrepreneurship, where you're kind of taking a risk here and there is a chance that it pays off and yields very, very good results. But there's a chance that it doesn't, in which case it's very, you know, sort of catastrophic for FarmKind in a way, or it seems to be that it could be. Did you all have a target for fundraising through this campaign, and how are you feeling relative to that?
Yeah, so as I say, we kind of main goal was to explore a new channel, and we very definitely saw this as kind of an exploratory thing, and so we didn't set our targets in terms of like, oh, we should raise this amount of money, because given the level of uncertainty, and we've never done a TV piece before, for example, we have done relatively little on our offset calculator, and so we didn't have the information to like set reasonable goals for like an amount of money raised. Our goal was instead to achieve an output, which is aiming for this TV slot, and then be able to say like, okay, does that produce like a large number of counterfactual donations? Because that was given the level of like information we have at the moment, that was a more appropriate kind of way to structure our goals from this campaign. So the goal was raising. We would judge the success in terms of raising donations, but we're looking at, in terms of like what we're trying to achieve here, we're looking at specific outputs and seeing whether those generated donations or not. So when we do our other work where we've done it more before, for example, when we're doing our paid work, we have very concrete goals around like, okay, this needs to hit like a certain number of donations per view and things like this in order to be something we want to keep doing. But for something more exploratory like this, it doesn't really make sense to set those kinds of like specific monetary goals.
Okay, interesting. And how do you feel that the campaign was received? Well, we spoke a bit about like it's important to have a messenger who is not describing themselves as a as a vegan or something like that, right? To have the messenger be meat eaters. How do you feel that the campaign was received broadly amongst the target audience, or has been received so far, I guess?
Oh, I mean, from the limited engagement that I've had on social media and with the media, it's been split. There have still been people who have said, who've just used it as an opportunity to criticize veganism and say they're never going to go vegan. So clearly, just reading headlines and reacting with their standard pattern response and not actually engaging with the content to see what was being said. But then there have been lots of comments from people saying, yeah, this is a campaign I can actually get behind. This is something that I feel is doable for me. This is actually realistic. And in fact, there was an excellent op-ed in the Evening Standard. She didn't speak to us at all, but she was talking about, oh, January again, everyone's asking us to stop drinking and stop eating meat. And, I'm just so bored of it all. And, these things aren't achievable for most people. It's setting people up for failure. And then she mentioned our campaign and actually ended with a really positive comment saying, I can help animals without having to change my diet. Sign me up. This is a campaign I can get behind. So I think to that type of individual, it did have appeal and it resonated.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's good to know that there are some people who I can totally see thinking that you need that very strong signaling and assurance that this is not about asking you to go vegan, because exactly as you say, you will lose a lot of people very quickly if you kind of give a hint that that's the case. I want to ask a bit about how you have been dealing with the reaction from within the movement. I've described it as you guys have made yourselves into the wasp cake that can sort of attract a lot of hate, but is hopefully functioning to make sure that everybody else in the movement is having a better time in terms of having more funding. How have you been dealing with the reaction from within the movement?
I mean, Tom, I don't know if you want to address, FarmKind in general, and then I can address the personal abuse.
Sure. Yeah. So, we were, I guess, we were comfortable with people in the movement not being happy with us as an organization. One of the things when we started FarmKind, one of the kind of reasons that we thought it was worth setting up a new organization rather than, for example, existing organizations just having more resources to do more fundraising, was that we could take risks that more established organizations couldn't because they had more to lose. It was the case until like pretty recently that FarmKind was just like so we've only been going since 2024. We have been for most of that time small enough that it really kind of wouldn't make too much of a difference whether we carried on or not. And so that's a great opportunity to like take some risks and do some things where if it goes wrong, then like we're the only ones who take the take the negative consequences of that. Ultimately, the movement overall can carry on. And so that was definitely something we kind of was in our minds when we started. I think one of the things we got wrong with this campaign and hold our hands up to is we didn't anticipate that some people would see our campaign as a reflection on the charities, for example, that we recommend. So I want to just take the opportunity to emphasize that none of the charities that we recommend were sort of on board with this campaign before we started, that they don't, just because we endorse their work doesn't mean that they endorse our work. And that they basically, we did this off our own initiative, without their sort of blessing or anything of that nature as well. And I think had we done it again, we would have made that clearer up front, because we really, like, what would have been a really big disaster from this campaign is if it had negatively affected the work of these amazing charities.
Yeah. And then, obviously I've received an absolute ton of personal abuse and comments and, really, just a ton of vitriol online, personal emails, messages from people who I haven't spoke to in probably a decade, suddenly demanding to know what my current diet is. It's nice to know they're all very concerned about me now. And I mean, I anticipated a lot of it. I really did. Again, I've been involved in the movement long enough to know that, you know, people's emotions run very high, and, you know, they genuinely believe that the only way, the best way, you know, to help farmed animals is to get people to change their diet. But I don't believe that. You know, my experience has led me to believe that we can't just keep shouting, go vegan, louder and more often, and expect it to magically happen. We need to try new things. We need to take risks. We need to think outside of, you know, diet change alone, if we genuinely want to reduce animal suffering. And that is what I want to do. And it's what I have always wanted to do. And I've never been afraid of, you know, being unpopular to do what I think is going to be the best avenue for animals, whether that was at one point, you know, back in 1990 when veganism wasn't even a thing, telling people to go vegan, to, you know, now saying, actually, you don't have to go vegan to help animals. Like, when the evidence changes, then I believe your strategy should change in the face of that evidence. So it's a risk you take being unpopular.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, both on the organizational level and like the sort of strategic thinking as FarmKind being a new organization with sort of nothing to lose in that sense. And then on a personal level, Tony, with perhaps quite a lot to lose in terms of big history in the movement and a lot of friends and contacts. And yeah, it's good to know that you are made of sterner stuff and can take a little bit of that. But nonetheless, yeah, it must have been tough all round. And I'm sure in those early weeks in January, you're thinking, have we really done the wrong thing here? And I'm sure very easy to, you sort of had to follow through to a decent extent to see if it would work, having done the reasoning that there's a good reason to think that it was. How do you prepare to resist that, you know, strong feedback? I mean, again, you must be, you're expecting it to some extent. Was there anything that you can do to sort of fortify yourself to stick it out to see if it works?
Mm-hmm. I mean, on a personal level, I mean, I don't engage with social media much anyways, but I certainly made a point through this campaign of just not looking at anything. I, you know, read the articles that came out, but no comments. I people trying to message me on social platforms who I had no idea who they were. I did not open their messages. It's like, I don't need to engage with these people. This isn't the audience that I'm looking to speak to. So for me, that helped quite a lot. And the team at FarmKind were also incredibly supportive, and that made a huge difference. And so I had a few very good friends, you know, who I've been campaigning with for years, who also reached out immediately in support. And, you know, that made a huge difference as well.
Yeah, and is there anything that's super interesting to hear? Is there anything on your side, Tom, that you or Aidan have done, or on an organisational level, perhaps, to sort of brace yourselves?
So one of the things we've done since the campaign was launching is we've not said a lot of things publicly, because we've not felt that. We've done some interviews. I did the interview with David. We're doing this interview now. We've made a couple of public statements where I think we've said the things we want to say. And in general, I think, like, we wanted to leave the space then open for people to discuss that with each other and kind of come to their conclusions and so forth. But what we have done is had a lot of one-to-one conversations with people across the movement and across different parts of the movement to kind of get their feedback, to you know, to see where people have felt we could have done things better, or we could still do things better and change things and that sort of thing, but also to just explain why we were doing what we were doing and get a sense of kind of what people thought about this. I think when it comes to kind of the movement overall, I think it's a mixed picture. I think some people have been have obviously been very against it. There have also been lots of people who've been really interested in it and thought, if nothing else, that like the attempt to kind of do something new was something that like was interesting and something that they sort of generally support in that sense. So yeah, we've tried to like keep going having these conversations, be very open to feedback, to thinking about what we've done, what we're doing, how we can make things better as we go forward with this campaign, as we go forward with future campaigns, all of that kind of thing. To it's basically to try and make sure that, like, to the extent that we did make mistakes, which we did with this campaign, that we don't make those same mistakes in the future. We'll just make other mistakes instead.
Right. Okay. Well, that's super interesting to hear about, and I'm sure that in these situations, you both mentioned having some supporters reach out as well. I'm sure that in these situations, the haters are much louder than the supporters on some level. But it's good to know that you have had people who understand what you're trying to do and have been supportive. Is there anybody? Well, I guess there's some people who are doing this in public, but probably many more are doing it in private, I imagine. Good to know that there have been, that people understand. Some people understand what you guys are trying to do. And I mean, I'll just say, I think that the main thing. Yeah, I Tony, what you said about people being, you're both wanting the same things and just having different ideas about the methods to get there. This is what Jane Land said when I spoke to her also, and I think that's most people in the movement at least understand, if even if they don't agree with the strategy. And then there are some people who are typically outside the movement who are just like very cynical and say, well, this lady used to be paid by the Veganuary organization, now she's getting paid by this other organization, and so she's just sort of a mercenary or whatever. And I want to say to them, like, you're working for animal charities, right? It's not exactly a gold mine, one would think.
No, quite. I mean, I took a pay cut to come to FarmKind from Veganuary, where it was an established organization, and I was in a very high level position there after 6 years. But that's, well, I mean, it shouldn't need saying, but that's never been a motivating factor for me. I've done grassroots animal rights activism my whole life. I have left other jobs with animal charities when I disagreed with the path that they were taking. And, out of, complete transparency, quite often that was a welfarist approach. Although I didn't disagree that that was actually going to produce good results for animals, and that, advocating a more welfarist approach was, not a bad thing for animals. It wasn't a message that at that time in my life I felt comfortable being the face of, as the head of an organization and the media spokesperson. I didn't want to have to go on national television and say, well, just treat chickens nicer and everything's okay. So, I've left other jobs in the past because I could no longer be that face of that message. And now over time, I've actually realized that is a message I'm much more comfortable with, because I just want to see fewer animals suffering in factory farms in the way that they do now. So, yeah, I mean, but haters gonna hate, right?
Indeed, yeah, that's many people are saying this. Yeah, I mean, to me that seems abundantly obvious that you are someone who is wanting the best things for animals, and you've had sort of empirical change of mind about how to get there. But yeah, worth having that on the record for people who question your motives there. I think, it seems abundantly clear that you all are trying to do good things, and this is the commentary I've heard from most people in the movement who have spoken about this. It's clear that the intentions are to help more animals this way. Final question I have written down then, and I appreciate we've run a little bit over time, so I appreciate you guys taking the time, and we'll have a little bit of time for you to add on anything else that you might want to say as well. There's been some speculation about whether the people involved in the FarmKind campaign are themselves vegan, and I've said on this it's probably a little bit difficult for you guys to answer, because part of the theory in this campaign is that you don't want to be signaling that this is a vegan thing, and so you might have a good reason to not want to answer this question either way, really, in my mind. but if you would like to, people will want me to have asked you, are you both in fact vegan?
My cat's saying something. I am. For reasons we've discussed, sometimes I think it would be better for FarmKind if I wasn't, but nonetheless, I have I don't want to lie, and so it is the case that I am vegan. Yes.
And I have the same diet I've had for many years now, which I am an imperfect vegan. When I was younger, I was a lot stricter than I am now. But over time, you begin to realize that sometimes, well, in an imperfect world, it's impossible to be perfect, and you stop beating yourself up about it.
Yeah. Okay, that's super interesting. And that, by the way, that is my thinking in a lot of what I talk about on the channel in terms of Vegan 2.0, going from a worldview where you're trying to exclude all animal exploitation insofar as practical and possible, to a focus on preventing exploitation as efficiently as effectively as possible. I think there are many more animals that can be helped that way. And yeah, I totally appreciate, I've thought this in watching some of the interviews with you guys, especially in discourse with the rest of the animal movement. There must be times where you want to say, God, I'm vegan. Okay, I swear. I can, like, here's my card. But you can't really do that necessarily, especially in the mainstream news and so on. You do, again, it's trying to be not a vegan thing, right? So you're kind of in a bind there sometimes.
Yeah, and I think actually that was one of the things that with some of the aspects of the campaign, that so the website, for example, it has this little mini game on it, which is like where you kind of avoid the things that people often say about vegans and stuff. And when we sort of built this, we were, as kind of like an organization which so we don't ask people in the organization what their diet is, because it's not really what we're about, but like it contains many people who are vegans or close to vegans. We kind of saw this as like taking the mick out of ourselves a little bit, you know. And obviously like other people who didn't know us didn't necessarily, many people read it as a joke, that it was intended to be. I don't think, you know, a little oat milk carton dodging "but lions eat meat" like screams like take me completely seriously, but nonetheless, like I think some people didn't know that it was made by some vegans that were sort of like taking the mick out themselves as part of the campaign, and so they read it differently. I don't know what we could have done about that, but yeah, nonetheless, for some people it didn't land because in the way that we intended, because they didn't know us in the same way. So
that's fair enough. I think it's quite normal in my experience for vegans to be very defensive, basically, and you know, guilty as charged in many cases, because you do have to get used to a lot of people asking you silly questions and sort of posing the silly reasons and so on. So I think it's quite normal to be to be defensive on that point.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, that's, I don't mean to sort of like disparage that. I get that. If if you're, I'm really lucky in that I live in London and I'm in a community of animal people. So like I'm just around a lot of people who are vegan or vegan sympathetic all the time. And like a lot of vegans are the only vegan or even vegetarian that they know. And that is a much harder life. And I don't mean to be sort of like disparaging of their perspective, and their, like, I think their defensiveness or is like very warranted in many cases, right? If you spent your entire life like literally having people say these things to you all the time, then like no wonder that you feel that way about it. And I think we definitely I don't want to come across as though I'm dismissing that. I think that's a completely legitimate way to feel, and I can't tell people that just because we intended it one way, that's how they must read it. They read it the way that they read it, right? And it's ultimately on us to land our messages the way that, like, not on people to interpret them the way that we intend them to interpret them. I think it's just to say that, like, when you're communicating with a little bit of irony, like some people will read it one way, some people will read it another, and that it's like it's a complex thing, right?
Definitely, yeah, and that does feel like it hits different if you are reading it without the knowledge that the people who made it are in fact vegan, right? It's sort of like a we can say it, guys, kind of situation, right? Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. And yeah, those other things on the website that you mentioned that you changed, I think it was really good that you guys were clearly, in my view, I think that you were open to feedback and changing things to a quite appropriate degree, because like I said, had to sort of follow through with the principle of the campaign in order to see whether it worked. So it wasn't really an option to pull the plug after a couple of days of pressure, or certainly it would be nothing gained in that case. But yet you changed things in the top part of the website as well, and made the messaging a little bit softer than it was previously, which I think was appreciated. So yeah, is there anything else you want to say on that, or that's pretty? I guess you speak.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately what the message that our website, that campaign's website has, it says something that I think is, it makes two claims that I think are both like pretty defensible. Like, one is that many people find being vegan hard. I think this is like empirically true. Many people don't, but like it is just the case that a very large number of people who try vegan diets like do not continue them, and many people say that the reason they can't do it or have stopped is because it was very difficult for all kinds of reasons. And then the second claim that we make is that you can prevent more animal suffering through giving than you can through changing your diet. And I think both those two claims are like eminently defensible claims. Reasonable people can disagree, but nonetheless, I think those are like eminently defensible claims. And like some of the stuff we said like maybe did overstep that line, and we pulled it back to that line. But I think that we're comfortable with that as the kind of ultimate message of that site.
Fair enough. Okay. Do you have anything to add on that, Tony? Or
I mean, I guess I might just point out that, because we took on board some of the criticism that we received, and where people felt that our message wasn't actually landing in the way that we had hoped it would, I did an interview with LBC Radio that they never aired, because it wasn't the sensationalist, I'm now eating meat and everyone else should too, and then just donate, which is what they were hoping for. So, we did tone it down in response. And because of that, perhaps the campaign didn't reach quite as wide an audience as we'd hoped, but that is a trade-off. And there are no perfect solutions in life. There are only trade-offs.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to re-emphasize that kind of trade-off, where the more heat that you guys would get from a more sensational campaign, the more coverage it allows you to get. But yeah, there's also then, of course, like the risks of giving too harsh a message about veganism and making fewer vegans in the long term or something like that, which of course is not your goal as well. Okay, well that's really everything that I had written down to ask you guys about. Is there anything else that you want to add on, or any other topics that you'd like to speak to here?
I mean, personally, I just really would like to plea to our movement to not let perfection be the enemy of progress, right? And certainly at Veganuary, that was very much our model and our motto. And I think, we as a movement, we really have to try, and it's hard because we all care so much about animals and we know how bad they suffer, but we have to try and step back and remain objective and focus on the reality. So where is society at the moment? Where can we realistically make progress for animals in our lifetime? And we have a duty to those animals to try and make as much progress for them as possible. We need to be less interested in being morally right and more interested in making a difference.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Sort of Rutger Bregman's book Moral Ambition is really, I think, is a really inspiring book if people haven't read it. And he makes this point in really quite stark terms, but he's like ultimately what matters is like, are we making the world a better place? And like sometimes we we shouldn't allow, we should make sure that that's always at the center of like the activities that we're doing. I wanted to make a different point, a slightly different point, if I could. So I think one of the things that some of the discourse I've seen around this campaign, a lot of people have kind of attributed, have sort of seen obviously that we kind of we at FarmKind, we think that like we can look at like how cost effective a charity is, and like we can say that some charities are more impactful than others and things like this. And they've said, oh, this is like they're somehow like avatars of the effective altruism movement or something like this, and like this is stands for like this part of the movement, and like try to make it a kind of EA's versus everybody else thing. I think I'd like to make like 2 points on that. One is to say that like many EA people also disagree with us about the campaign for like the same reasons that like many people in there who would not call themselves part of the EA part of the movement do. And so I do think that like for those listeners who are less familiar with kind of effective altruism, you should not take like FarmKind's approach or what we say as like representative of anything beyond our own opinions, because I think it is just the case that like I think more EAs disagree with us about this campaign than agreed with us, from what I've seen. But secondly, I also think that it can come across to people as though EA is sort of like, oh, like we've kind of crunched the numbers, we know what the right thing to do is, and like it's just these charities, these are the only ones, like all the money on shrimp or something like this, and I do think that like it's always important to emphasize that a really key part of the approach that we certainly have at FarmKind is trying to be humble and think about like, where does the evidence lead us, but acknowledging the massive uncertainty of the evidence base in our movement and in the work that we're trying to do. And the work is really, really hard, and very like we have found a few things that do seem to work really well, and there's a lot of stuff that's very, very experimental. Like it's hard to get data, it's hard, there aren't really RCTs in our space compared to say global health or something. We're all like working with like having to apply quite a lot of judgment to the work that we do, and in that environment reasonable people can disagree. And just because we think that like, just because we recommend the 6 charities we do, that doesn't mean those are the 6 charities that we think are the only good charities. And we are very open to charities that maybe I don't think are necessarily meet the same bar. I definitely think I could be wrong about that. And overall, we're really happy that we have a diverse movement with lots of people trying different things that we don't think will work, but nonetheless know that we could be wrong about that. And I just wanted to really emphasize that we don't think that we don't have all the answers at FarmKind, and I don't think any sort of effective altruism person would say that they thought they had all the answers either. And we really value the breadth of experimentation and approaches in our movement, because I think that ultimately that is how we'll succeed, by trying lots of things and then seeing what works.
100% agree. Yeah, we haven't ended factory farming yet or created a vegan world, so no one's found the solution, right? The one tactic that's going to make this happen. So yeah, break the mold, get out there and try something new.
Yeah, I think I mean that's what I've sort of described. That's why I've sort of described it like moral entrepreneurship, because you are kind of taking a risk. But in a sense, we all are, because like you say, we don't have very good data that any of these approaches will work, and yet we've good reasons to think that some of them work better than others, and so on. So it's definitely developing. And yeah, I would say, I mean, I've heard some criticisms of effective altruism which kind of end up being criticisms of some current effective altruist or a particular person's position. But I mean, I said on this, I think of it similarly to like science, in the sense that there could be some individual scientists or effective altruists who are wrong about a particular thing, but the solution would be to do more research on that and work out a better way to do it, and more science or more effective altruism. And I would think of that as part of that process as well. And yeah, I appreciate that you guys have said since the start you'll be willing to say if this was wrong, or if any of your campaigns are worse than expected or whatever, and that risk taking, your organization sort of in a unique position to do that. Of course, bigger orgs simply couldn't. So yeah, I don't hate that there's some risk takers in the movement, and I think that that diversity of strategies and learning from it is going to be crucial to getting us there in the long term. Nice. Okay. Well, maybe one final question I can ask you, and you may not be able to share anything about this. Any clues about future campaigns that you have in mind?
So we've just wrapped up our 2026 planning. We currently don't have. We've got some interesting ideas. Nothing like sort of in this spicy realm. We basically last year was a really great year for us. We did the so we helped Lewis Bollard out with his interview on the Duakesh podcast, which raised over $2 million overall for animal charities. We ran a bunch of experiments as FarmKind. We did to give you a sense of the breadth. We did some much more cozy, fluffy things. We ran a protest for people with their pets to protest against factory farming in New York. As one attempt at media stuff that no one was interested in the media. We tried various forms of advertising. We tried all sorts of things. And we found, somewhat to our surprise, that some of those things were actually like quite good and quite effective. So this year, one of our big focuses is doubling down on the stuff that really worked last year, and doing more of those things. And so we're pleased to be in a position where now, for most of FarmKind's history, we've been in a position of like having fundamentally no idea how to how we can actually get this to work, and just trying things and seeing whether anything will work, and most of those things failing and not working, and yet somehow still growing month on month inexplicably ultimately. And now we are in a position where actually we've got some stuff where like, oh, this actually seems promising, and so we're going to be kind of getting our heads down and trying to make the most of those opportunities that we've identified, basically.
Excellent. And ads, is there a return on investment for ads?
So sometimes it depends on the context, basically.
Okay, interesting. Maybe a question for another time. We can meet again and talk again. Tony and Tom, I really, really appreciate you taking time to talk to me. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you both, guys.